Our final paper will be given by Kurt Müller-Pedersen from Aarhus University, and he will be talking about Greenland in some various aspects.
Thank you for Diana and Jed inviting me to celebrate Jed's birthday. It's a great honor. You have always, Jed and Diana, been inspiring to me, and also while Jed was in Aarhus, inspiring to the whole department, to Ole Knudsen, to Kirsti Andersen, Jesper Lützen, I believe, was there, and particularly, I believe, Philip Lerby. You have some severe discussions with him. You were inspiring to me also because of your enthusiasm. And I remember years ago in Paris, we walked around from one cafe to the other and to a restaurant. And then late in the evening, Jed said, I have something really interesting to show you, a quite new tool, a wonder of the world. And he took his laptop, computer, and said, here is the wonder of the world, WordPerfect 5.2. Well, I'll come up with another story, if it works. Well, I'll tell you a story from my new homeland, Greenland, and about Americans in Greenland. In June 1925, US Navy sent two ships, the Baudouin and the Perry, to an expedition to the west coast of Greenland. On board the Baudouin was the leader of the expedition, Donald Macmillan, a veteran Arctic explorer who had traveled with Robert Peary almost to the top of the globe. For most, Greenland, and he had traveled very, very often there. Macmillan had conducted several subsequent expeditions to Greenland before his travel on the Baudouin, becoming well acquainted with both the land and the sea surrounding the island. On board the larger Perry was the commander of the Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics, Richard Evelyn Byrd. Along with 3 airplanes, the expedition reached as far north as Ita, North Greenland, 11.5 degrees from the North Pole. And, well, you can see it. I think I have a pointer somewhere, but Ita is up here. It's quite close to the North Pole. And the expedition reached as far as Ita, but they remained there for a month, in the month of August 1925, but then they have to return because of rough ice and in the Polar Sea. Now, the expedition was scientific in nature. Its task was exploring the mysterious and vast unexplored area between Alaska and the North Pole. The area was inaccessible by ships and extremely difficult to reach by dogs, and thus awaited exploration by air. 39 men took part in the expedition, 8 of whom were in the aviation unit. For Macmillan, the main objectives of the mission were to explore the unknown and acquire geographic knowledge and to study the natural phenomena of the area. The commander of the aviation section, Commander Byrd, also wanted to survey the uncharted ice line between Alaska and the North Pole. and ascertain if it was possible to fly in these Arctic regions. Were the engines reliable enough, and would it be possible to navigate from the air? Bert was the expert. Let me see if I can find out how this works. Here you have his airplane, and it was quite a new device at that time. I don't think Jet would have tried that, but he was Bert, a man who wanted to experience with this. And to survive the region, Bert wanted to fly airplanes across hundreds of kilometers of icy terrain with no visible landmarks whatsoever. To determine, let me see here you have his plane, and here we are again to explore the unknown. And here, to determine the position, Bert relied on the sun compass and the bubble sextant which he had invented. It would be quite a cold experience for himself and his co-pilot Bennett, sitting as they did in an open cockpit. This way of pioneering, this was a pioneering contribution to aerial mapping of a terrain made possible from a generous support from the United States Navy. It was not, however, the first time a mapping of an area in Greenland was carried out. Macmillan and many American and European explorers produced ground-based maps during their expeditions. Excuse me. I cannot read without my lamp. The Inuit also had their own tradition of making maps. In the 1880s, Inuit from the east coast of Greenland produced wooden maps of the coastline. Elder, experienced Inuit used these maps to tell young people and foreigners how to navigate by pointing out fjords and mountains on their hand-hold maps. On the west coast of Greenland, there was a similar tradition recorded for the first time in connection with the 1925 Macmillan expedition. On June 5th, 1925, we hear about Inuit maps in a letter from Herbert Putnam, librarian of the Library of Congress, to Curtis Wilbur, secretary to the US Navy. And he wrote, in connection with Macmillan Arctic expedition carried out in cooperation with the United States Navy, the chief of the Division of Maps of the Library of Congress is anxious that I should attempt through you to secure one or more maps made by Eskimos. If the projects interest you, would you be willing to transmit this letter to Commander Byrd, US Navy? It would be admirable if Commander Byrd might secure for the Library of Congress some old map made by an Eskimo, preferable a map on a skin. I fear, however, there are none. End quotation. Let me go back to the outbound journey of the Macmillan expedition. On 16th of July, 1925, Peary arrived at the port of Godhavn and followed a week later by the Baudouin. When Peary arrived at Godhavn, Captain MacDonald asked Governor Rosenthal for coal supply, but was told that no coal could be spared. Peary was a real coal burner with its 600 horsepower triple expansion engine, 9-foot propeller, and triple-plated bow. 600 horsepower. That was quite an engine. No coal supply would have spelled the end of the expedition, but MacDonald persisted. Through shortwave communication with Washington, however, the offices of the Danish ambassador to the U.S., Constantin Brun, was enlisted, and by the time of Boudouin's arrival a week later, plentiful coal had been promised at Umanak. The controversy about coal took days, and Byrd was upset. He had hoped, but told nobody about it, but he had hoped that when arriving to Etah, he and Bennett would try to cross the North Pole by plane. Now he had to wait in Godhavn, and in his diary, Byrd wrote about this. On top of this, no one is allowed to go to the village because the Eskimos have an epidemic whooping cough. The governor says he is afraid we will carry the disease north and give it to the Eskimos. I tried to get the governor to have some laundry done, but he said it couldn't be done. And he continues, but there has been no evidence whatsoever of any hospitality. He took the opportunity to send the governor a letter. My dear governor, I am enclosing a letter from the librarian of the Congress, which has been forwarded to me by the Secretary of the Navy. Will you please do me the favor to procure an Eskimo chart for Dr. Putnam? If you can do so, cordially yours, Byrd. Putnam was specific about what he wanted. An old map made by an Eskimo on a skin. And he wrote, failing this, it might be possible to arrange to have an Eskimo draw freehand in pencil on a piece of white man's paper his own representation of an island, a peninsula, or other body of land near the Eskimo's home, or his hunting grounds, or near the base where the U.S. Peary has lying for the time. Such a map by an amateur surveyor would certainly not be a significant tool for the guiding of the United States Navy to remote places in the Arctic. Byrd was an expert on navigation, and Macmillan on the Boudouin and MacDonald on the Peary knew the waters from earlier expeditions to the Arctic. Putnam had something more in his mind, and he says, airplane photographs of the same area so that a more accurate map could be compiled after the return to the United States. And Putnam suggested here a collaboration between Greenland and the United States to improve maps by involving both airplane photos and the usual maps on paper. For Putnam and Byrd, the project was a success. Byrd did not get his laundry done in Godhavn, but he and Putnam got their map. The map was made by a local, hunter, Cedar Sandgrain, who knew the waters and island from many tours in his kayak. What Putnam had in mind was a map drawn with pencil or pen on a skin. What Sandgren produced, however, was something completely different. Pencils were not common, but he could do almost the same thing with his knife and a piece of driftwood. Sandgren spent the next year traveling around the islands in Disco Bay, and his resulting map was sent to Washington via Copenhagen. Sandgren's map is remarkable, relying wholly upon his own observations near his home and after repeated visits by dog sleds or kayak to locate the remote island. Sandgren mapped 83 islands and 10 reefs. The best Danish chart from this time depicted only 38 islands. The individual islands are whittled out of Siberian driftwood. They are sewn to the sealskin with thongs and then painted. And here you have the maps. The one to the left is now in Aarhus, Denmark, and the one to the right is in Washington, D.C. I can show you another picture here. You can see it's not that bad. But of course, a modern map is more accurate. But here is what was made in 1925 by a local Eskimo hunter. Now, I became interested in this driftwood map because we have that map in the basement of the Stenum Museum in Aarhus, Denmark. I do not know if you ever saw it, but it's still there. While I was a director of the museum, I wondered what it really was. My research led me to the Library of Congress, and in the National Archives in Nuuk, I found the letters exchanged between Putnam, Byrd, and the governor. I saw the map in the Library of Congress. It is a fine piece of craftsmanship. A similar map was sent to Copenhagen and later to the Stenum Museum. Modern maps of Greenland are based on photos taken by Byrd, Lauke Koch, from airplanes in the 1930s and later on in the 1980s and 90s. These maps of Greenland, these maps we are using today, are not good enough, and they do not correspond to the modern GPS technology. There is a need for a more accurate and precise map that has only increased as Greenland has gone more international attention, particularly in conjunction with a search for raw material and trade development. Unlike the early efforts of the 1920s and 30s that originally brought the coast of Greenland into relief, modern maps do not really require photos from aircraft. Currently, the mapping of Greenland, as well as other regions of the Arctic, is being undertaken by a new collaboration between Greenland, Denmark, and the United States of America, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. This effort is also being driven by the melting of the polar ice, which has opened newly navigable waterways and provided access to virtually untouched fisheries and large deposits of minerals. New maps will be produced not from aircrafts, but from photos taken by satellites. Oh, what's happening here? for Bert and Koch, as well as other pilots, it took months to cover only a small portion of the north. The satellites run much faster, each satellite making 14 passes per day over the high Arctic. To quote the director of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, Director Robert Cardillo, this collaboration makes available high-resolution satellite-based elevation data of Alaska and the entire Arctic to inform policy and decision makers in an increasingly critical part of the world. So the mapping of Greenland, the mapping of the North, began with a collaboration between the United States Navy, Richard Byrd, and is now continuing with the satellite observations of Greenland and the Arctic. Thank you.